Hi everyone, this is just a quick video of last night's Overview and Scrutiny Meeting, which myself and Councillor Boone attended as visiting members to speak on item 6, which was to do with safeguarding and keeping events politically neutral and things like that, all to do with events. It arose from a motion that was brought to full council a few months ago that a few of us collaborated on bringing forward. And this discussion didn't just include Chester Pride, but it also included things that have happened and gone wrong at Winsford Pride over the last 3 years. So the officers had produced a report, but they produced that report. It was quite vague and it was without collaboration with the members who brought the motion.
Good evening, colleagues. I've shared a handout with images to highlight the issues this agenda item addresses, as visuals often speak louder than words. I apologise for the poor print quality and the missing images due to time constraints, but they clearly show the problem. So I thank officers for their report. However, it sounds similar to what I've heard for 3 years from the council leader, and yet the problems with events are escalating, not improving. The Safety Advisory Group has proven to be useless in protecting children and preventing exposure to unsuitable event content, and the Council isn't undertaking due diligence in applying the law. Please see the final pages of the document that I have passed around for very recent evidence of this. It's simply nowhere near good enough to fob the blame for such profound failure that involves children onto the licence applicants. We have legal responsibilities and obligations and can and must impose requirements, and we must monitor these events much more closely. The report doesn't even reference what has gone wrong, and it isn't specific in how it plans to address that. Conservative colleagues, recognising the biased environment stifling full council meetings, proposed and seconded the motion behind this agenda item, and I thank them for doing so. Cllr Gittins dismissed my questions, such as whether scantily clad drag queens, dancing with children, or those pushing ideologies such as babies identifying as trans at 18 months is normal at our events, and events that we licence, fund and celebrate. And I asked the question about whether those people were DBS checked. This was dismissed. It shouldn't have been dismissed. And it was dismissed on the grounds that I've asked too many similar questions, refusing to address children's safety on the grounds that some people don't agree with my beliefs. This is not about individuals' beliefs. This council isn't here to represent individuals' beliefs, it's here to safeguard children, and it should be apolitical. If we're licensing events, we need to make sure that they are properly family-friendly if that's what they're being advertised as. If they're political protests, they need to be described as such. The fuzzy images still make the point. This is a licensing and policy issue. We must stop licensing hostile and politically biased sexualised content at events within Cheshire, West and Chester. Individual councillors' or officers' views shouldn't dictate council policy as if undisputed. We represent all residents and their diverse views. I hope that committee members this evening will be shocked at some of the images they see in the report that I've passed around this evening. The worsening issue demands more than a vague officer report sidestepping the core problems. The situation has become worse because of inaction or belated token gestures at one isolated event that doesn't carry across to other events within the borough, and because of adherence, slavish adherence, to a stubborn ideology that often carries with it highly unsavoury materials, messages and performances around kids. It's not enough to say that it's the organising body's responsibility. We are neglecting our role in keeping children safe, and we should not be pushing controversial fringe ideologies. We need clear remedies to prevent recurrence, not a one-off meeting. Thank you, members.
Councillor Cllr. Councillor Boone. You also have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. This agenda item is asking the committee to look at events the council licenses, participates in, promotes, and the officer report recommends approval of improved processes, but it's vague. Given the extent of the issues and the refusal of the council's leadership to answer very straightforward questions in relation to past child safeguarding failures, this doesn't inspire confidence. The whole point of scrutiny is to scrutinise and not to gloss over issues, especially when it comes to ensuring child safeguarding at events, regardless of belief or protected characteristics. The handout brought by Councillor Cllr, which is being passed around, shows images of striptease performances in child-accessible areas of Chester Pride. Councillor Cllr complained at full council a couple of times, was ignored, ridiculed, and eventually the glitter tent was age restricted to over 18s and security measures were put in place. The images of Winsford Pride clearly show sexualised performances by men in front of children and have taken place now for 3 years in a row, despite many complaints from Councillor Cllr and myself. The sale of sexualised items and goods promoting political ideology and hostility continue to be present at these events, despite every attempt made by Councillor Cllr and myself to challenge and raise the alarm about this. Last year, we spoke with a man at Chester Pride who had a store and was pushing the idea that children as young as 18 months old know they are trans. Evidence was provided regarding that conversation, yet he was invited back this year to run another store, and accordingly to a resident report, he's now revised this to some newborn babies knowing they are trans. Why is he being allowed to preach this? I have seen stalls at Cheshire Pride events with expletives on flags, T-shirts, scarves, badges, so severe I've been asked not to repeat those foul words in this meeting by the chair, as it's being webcast and there are also children present. Yet this council continues to licence these events where children are encouraged to attend and witness this foul language in print and also view sex toys too. By restricting me from repeating what's written, this committee is also proving my point as valid, and I ask that that is recorded, please. This is the 3rd year running that these kind of concerns have been raised and also ignored. It's not a good signal to the community that Cheshire West Council are choosing to play this down and hide within a nondescript officer report that doesn't really say anything about the problems I and Councillor Cllr have highlighted or how serious they have now become. We need to do better, and I ask that you do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Boone. Members, open up to members. Councillor Wadlow.
Thank you, Chair. There's a number of issues that have been raised this evening and of deep concern. We as elected members are asked to contribute members' budgets to some of the events named this evening. The council puts contributions of council taxpayers' money to some of the events mentioned tonight. At said events, there is merchandise which is expletive laden against my political party and indeed other political parties represented on this council. That is an unacceptable use of council taxpayers' money. And a deep review does need to go into exactly how some of this works. The report says about an explicit condition of council funding. Who is going to be policing this explicit condition? Will there people be on the ground at said events to police what is being said, what is on offer, what opportunities there are for children to access this? And I'm speaking as a concerned uncle to 6 young nephews and nieces, and I'm sure everyone in this room, parent, uncle, aunt, etc., needs to be very clear about what the role is. There's talk about an annual review of safeguarding matters, and events, which goes to the director. I think, to be honest, should be shared with members of this committee. I think this is a political narrative here which needs to be explored. I don't think necessarily being signed off by an officer is at all correct. And this is not the first trend either, because we also have concerns, I have concerns about places like Storyhouse running, what was the event they ran in February? Mini Pride for ages 3 to 7-year-olds. Was it £902,000 of council taxpayers' money given to Storyhouse in 2024-25 budget? That is of concern too. So there are a number of concerns, and there are a number of guarantees and additional controls, I think, which would be befitting for this committee to look at. I'll leave my comments there, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Stocks.
I must admit I was a little surprised when I saw this item was on the agenda this evening, because as one of the two councillors who moved the motion at council, I think it was in December, and I think, if I remember correctly, it was about 10 to 10 on a Thursday night, and there was limited time available, and it was agreed that this would go to scrutiny. I envisaged that when the motion went to scrutiny, that scrutiny would have some discussions over the context of events and things like that. I have to say, I've not been contacted since I moved the motion from anybody with regard to my thoughts or comments on the motion that was presented. And I find that quite strange that we produced a report, and I believe also Councillor Waddle hasn't been spoken to regarding the motion that we put forward at council. And I find it a little strange that we come forward with a response to the motion without having discussed the background to the motion with the members who presented it. I would have expected, at the very least, the consideration perhaps be given to a task group set up to establish some of the issues that were causing members concern. But none of that's taken place. I'm actually even more shocked tonight to find out that we're now considering asking Children's Services and Adult Social Care to have a representation in the process. Child safety is our #1 priority in this authority, and yet we're now thinking about doing it. I don't think it's acceptable. My personal recommendation My personal recommendation is that this should be deferred. We should set up a task group to investigate a number of issues that have been raised, and that the task group should report back with recommendations as to the way forward. I'd be interested to know, it was mentioned the fact that SAG has reviewed certain events. I'd I have to admit, I've been on the council since its inception. I didn't even know SAG existed. So I would actually appreciate to have an understanding of who's on this, who actually is overseeing anything. And I personally don't believe the report this evening is substantiated by the fact that we have enough detail to approve what's being suggested. So I would like to make a recommendation that we as a scrutiny committee consider setting up a task group, a task and finish group to review the policy.
So I thought they were really good speeches by the Conservative councillors, and I was very appreciative that they were willing to bring this forward. It's worth just mentioning at this point that the council has funded the charity that's called Chester Pride, which organises the Chester Pride event, plus a lot of other stuff within the community around the LGBT plus agenda, to the tune of about £9,000 about 3 years ago. 2 years ago that doubled, it was about 19-20 grand for that year, and then the following year, 2024, it had risen to £49,000 of council funding into that organisation. So there's a vagueness about which particular aspects the funding will have been funnelled into at that event, but that kind of is immaterial in a sense. It means that the council have funded that organisation to pursue that agenda however they see fit. And how they've seen fit is depicted within the images that I've shared. So let's have a look at some of those. So the councillors had a look at these. Quite often at these events, there are people and stalls that have expletives on them around children. This was the first striptease that was in the child accessible tent in 2023 or 4. I get mixed up now. This was the second one around kids. Here's a child. I blurred out that child's face, but the reason that I took a picture of that child was to show that there were children in that tent. Much has been made of the fact that, Councillor Cllr's been photographing other people's children. You can see the back of a child there walking into that striptease tent. And within that same tent, they were selling sex toys at child eye height. And obviously, as you can see, they're in bright colours and shapes that would be quite attention-grabbing to children. So the images that I've taken may have children in them, but it's just to show that this is the kind of stuff that's being promoted to children. These are just some of the other images from Pride that same year. There's a lot of fetish and porn category type masks and clothing that's worn around children that's being normalised. And messaging, so these kinds of messages are quite frequent at these events. And quite often in child-friendly colours as well. There's the leather pup fetish contingent of the march, the same march that councillors and the police were also part of. This was merch that was on sale at child eye height at Winsford Pride in 2024. So as you can see, it's very strongly ideological. So the council is funding something that's pushing an ideological and political agenda, but also that's quite sexualised with regards to children. This is Steph Holmes, who's the CEO of a charity or a non-profit organisation called Chrysalis Transsexual. That's a whole other video, but they were invited back. That was discussed in the meeting as well. So there's another drag queen. These were at Winsford Pride in 2020. I think this was 2022, the first year that it was run. This was 2023. So the outfit had progressed to this one, where there was a child-friendly clown face over the guy's crotch as he was burlesquing around in front of very, very young children. This was at Winsford Pride in 2025, something I can comment more about after December. But yeah, this is Winsford 2025 as well. So this is why pictures of children are taken, just to show. Otherwise, there isn't any evidence. Nobody's kind of commenting on it. So that's it. So these are the kinds of images that were shared in the meeting with the councillors around the table, just to illustrate. Now, these are Chester Pride 2025. So all of these councillors have been forewarned that this is the kind of material that year on year is being displayed around children. It's not that they've only just suddenly now become aware of it. The hostile messaging, so you're not welcome at these events if you have a certain particular political viewpoint. So are they even social events, or are they political protests? And there's a dildo in a sex health stall that was also has the political pride flag on the front of it and is accessible to children, or all ages of children, quite freely. So this was at Chester Pride this year as well. So it's not as if the officers and the group that governs these events or keeps an eye on these events isn't aware. This is Chester Pride 2025 again. Luckily, people managed to go along and get photographic evidence and share this with councillors. And this is the kind of stuff that some of those councillors, I'm not going to put it all on one councillor. There were a number of them last night that were just absolutely fine, quite vociferously fine with this kind of stuff at events that the council is funding and endorsing, celebrating, licensing and kind of not responding when these problems are pointed out. It's just hard to understand why that is. So here are the Labour councillors that voted in favour of the really vague officer report, which was brought forward without any collaboration with the councillors who had brought the motion in the first place that led to this agenda item and this discussion. There's no consultation with them. It was just a fait accompli, as was pointed out. And these Labour councillors were absolutely fine with that and absolutely fine with all of those materials, which everybody's had sight of, some of them dating back, as I say, 3 years. So just in terms of the red herrings that were thrown in by the Labour councillors last night, they kind of were knocking back suggestions that there were any problems with this event on the basis that it's just down to personal taste. So it's also down to freedom of expression and free speech, or that it's a moral issue. So that downgrades it basically from being child safeguarding issue, public decency thresholds having been crossed. And it kind of says, well, are you some kind of maiden aunt? You know, what's your problem? You're a bit oversensitive. Each to their own. Don't you want a free world where people can express themselves how they want and take their children to whatever they want? Which almost begs the question, do they believe that there shouldn't ever be any child safeguarding boundaries anywhere, ever, for any reason? Because where do you draw the line? And that's the whole point of safeguarding. And what they appear to be saying is, we're going to reframe this, come what may. There's nothing that we can do. But more than that, there's nothing that we really feel we should do, because we're fully in favour of all of this. And what kind of oversensitive maiden aunt would question any of it? They're also saying it's not our fault. So that was another one that was thrown in. And it has been thrown in repeatedly every time I've tried to raise these issues and presented the evidence over the last 3 years. I just get back these kinds of excuses that it's the event organisers and it's nothing to do with us. But actually, as a licensing authority and as a public body that's providing funding and that's celebrating this and that's advertising it all over social media, all over the internal email system, encouraging everybody to get along, and who's participating in the parade and has stalls there, I just don't think that claim can be made legally, apart from anything else, apart from morally. And I do think there is a moral case to be made. And I do think that councils have an important role in setting the standards and ensuring that there isn't a slip downwards into normalising things that are morally questionable and that blur the boundaries of safeguarding. I think that's one of the most important responsibilities that councils have, if not the most important responsibility. Same with the police. Another red herring that was thrown in was, don't be mean about pride. So there was this thing about, well, you know, it should apply to all organisations. You can't just pick on one type of organisation. And the point with that is that nobody has said that these safeguards shouldn't apply to all events. Nobody's said that. Obviously, if it's a blanket policy, then it will apply. And these safeguards will apply across the board, and so they should. But I think what often happens, especially for people who aren't used to being involved in this particular fight, is that people then are fooled into stepping onto the back foot because they don't want anybody to think that they're transphobic or homophobic or that they're against pride in principle. And this isn't about being in favour of pride in principle or being opposed to pride in principle. It's about the fact that these events have been captured by a particular ideology and they have changed. And so what we're seeing is a pattern where we're not seeing dildos appearing at the Christmas fete, you know, or, for example, the Salt Fair in Winsford. I mean, I don't want to give people ideas, God forbid, but, you know, this isn't, one of the officers in the meeting more or less said, there's no point us doing an audit and presenting a report to councillors at the next scrutiny meeting as to how the monitoring's going after Christmas, despite the fact that we have lots of Christmas events, because the Christmas events and the other events aren't the ones where we're seeing these problems. And that was probably the most honest thing that was said. He didn't say it in exactly those words, but if you can be bothered going to the link and watching the whole meeting, he actually more or less says you might as well leave it a year, and the chair agrees with him. Everybody in that room knows what type of events are causing these problems again and again and again, and not just in Chester, but in other areas as well. And obviously not just in Cheshire West and Chester either. This is the elephant in the room. And I think we have to be unafraid to say it, because otherwise it's like when you raise a genuine red flag concern, like what about women's safety and in prisons, if there's men in those prisons, or, you know, what about women's safety and privacy and dignity in changing rooms, and people say, oh, but aren't you a bit transphobic? And people then all of a sudden start defending themselves, and it's a switch and bait tactic, which is always used whenever anything is raised as a red flag in relation to this agenda, the LGBTQ plus agenda. So it's the ideological agenda and the nasty stuff that comes with it is what is being questioned. And everybody knows it's problematic, but only some people are willing to speak up, and definitely only some people are willing to do something about it. And I definitely think that we have to move on from this, allowing ourselves to be pushed onto the back foot for fear of someone thinking that we hate Pride or that we hate a certain group of people. It absolutely isn't about that, and it never has been about that. And they know that. And when they push us onto the back foot, defending ourselves, oh, no, you know, I'm not being mean about Pride. All of a sudden, the conversation's changed from what the red flag is to what you might be, what kind of person you might be. We've got to get better at seeing that one coming. The magical PSPO, their public space protection orders, which Councillor Bingham loves to raise as a cure-all to everything that ails us with regards Pride. You know, he says that that's going to sort out any issues on the day right there, you know, because it's now been rolled out across the whole borough. Well, I actually have it on authority from the council that they don't attend Pride events. That's not the kind of thing that they're designed for. They're designed for, and they show up at, really big events where there's lots of drinking going on and there could be fighting en masse. So things like Chester races and things like that. They don't habitually turn up to Chester Pride even, or Winsford Pride or any of the other Pride events. So that's another red herring. You know, all the time all we hear is just absolute waffle from these people, and it's children, you know, it's children within this borough, and it's every resident within this borough that's being insulted by this. Everybody should be welcome to go along to Pride and feel safe and not be met with hostile merch and messaging that says if you believe this, you're transphobic and you're not welcome, or whatever it is. And everybody should be safe to take their children to an event that's advertised as family friendly, without the bar for family friendly being the stuff you see when you go in Ann Summers. You know, most people probably don't take their children in Ann Summers, but at least you know what the deal is before you walk in there. What are we saying? Are we saying that's the bar that we're setting for events that are advertised as family friendly, and anything goes up to and including, and in some cases exceeding that? Because you wouldn't see the language that was on some of that merch, or the ideology that was being pushed at a number of these events at in an Ann Summers shop. You know, we've gone above and beyond in our disregard for children and family life with this in Cheshire West and Chester. And I am just going to say, given that we're talking about Pride, that I think anyone who stands up against this, because of the amount of gaslighting that you're subjected to, and this meeting is just a masterclass in that everything was pulled out of the hat, which I think probably is an indication that we've made an impact, which is a good thing. But you have to withstand that. And particularly for myself and Councillor Boone, in that setting, we're there as visiting members because we're not part of that committee. So we didn't get a second bite at the cherry. We didn't get to correct any of the misinformation, or address any of the red herrings and distractions or gaslighting. We didn't get the opportunity to do that. So it's really frustrating to listen to it. I think anybody who's prepared to go up against this, given the really extreme pushback that people can be subjected to, should be proud. If we're talking about Pride, that's where the pride is. They said the police weren't interested. It was reported to the police, or by someone, we don't know who. Was that a resident? Was that officers? I mean, we just don't know, because they didn't want to have the meeting or the task group to unravel what's happened and how these things have been dealt with up to now, to see how it can be specifically improved and prevented. And we've had 3 years of failure to prevent this stuff, you know. So then they reveal that what the police had been answering were questions about obscene materials outside of the event perimeter. So that didn't even count. So you can't say the police weren't interested, because from what they've told us, the police weren't consulted about the obscene materials inside of the event parameter that was licensed. And in any event, you hope, don't you, that the police haven't seen those kinds of expletives on display on a street stall, regardless of whether it's within the licensed event perimeter or not, and just said, oh no, that doesn't meet the threshold for obscene publications and we have no problem with that around the public, around children. You hope that's not the case. So I don't know. I guess we'll have to try and find out. But yeah, let's talk about Challenge 25 or gambling or fire safety or anything else other than child safeguarding and the actual materials that were on display and the actual performances that have taken place and the actual stuff that's been sold around children at events that the council funds and licenses and is supposed to keep an eye on. Let's talk about everything else, because obviously, you know, youth drinking and Challenge 25 and fire safety are the main reasons this was on the agenda. You know, they know why this was on the agenda, so they'll do anything to dodge and squirm, because that's kind of all they have left when they've messed up this badly. And then someone made a comment about violence at Pride events and some people because of their views, etc., etc. So that was a nice touch at the end. We just have to see these people coming and we have to be ready to just remain single focused. And I think we have to be unafraid to say, yeah, you know what, it is the Pride events that are causing all of these problems right at the minute, but let's learn from it and let's put in place better measures for all of our events, just in case anyone in any event is ever thinking about doing any of this stuff, and especially around kids. So legal areas, I've had a look at this and I think there's a few areas that may apply, but if there are any barristers or lawyers or anybody who cares about this stuff who's watching this video and you would like to contact me, there's a few of us actually on the council, and obviously there was complaints about this event as well. I've had complaints and others have had complaints, and there was a copy of a resident complaint handed around to the members of the committee as well last night. But yeah, get in touch, give us your thoughts. But malfeasance in public office, because the council is supposed to ensure that that they're robustly risk manage events that they're licensing and assess them for safety. And they've been repeatedly warned and they've repeatedly refused to answer questions. They've also linked their refusal to answer questions specifically to views of mine that they say, not everybody agrees with your views. I mean, my personal views should be irrelevant, but they keep bringing that up and that's on record. So that probably strays into some other areas of perhaps of the Equality Act as well. But I think that might be civil rather than criminal. But certainly malfeasance in public offices, I think that's a criminal matter. The Licensing Act 2003 probably applies. The publication of obscene content and promotion of gender transition within all of this, which has happened recklessly, which contravenes the Caste Review, so probably the Children Act, Section 17. There's probably a few counts of law that are relatable there. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, although that would be civil, I think. The Education Act, because there were materials on one of the stalls, someone who had been invited back, who was known to have produced similar materials last year by the council. They invited him, he was invited back, no one stopped that, no one monitored it. And the materials that were being handed out off that stall, which had a special little wind-up fluffy toy on it to attract kids, actually encourages schools to break the law in relation to single-sex toilets. It also completely ignores the Caste Review, apart from that. Yeah, Obscene Publications Act 1959, under failure to risk assess and restrict these kinds of materials. So I don't know, I think there's a few legal angles to go at there. When the officers play it down and they say, and the councillors as well, say, oh, well, no one's broken the law and we're working within the law and I don't even think there's anything wrong with any of this stuff anyway. I think maybe that's not quite correct, and I'm wondering if that's an area that's worth exploring. So if anyone can share any information, further information about that from a professional perspective, that would be very, very welcome. So I will sign off here with just, I mean, there were so many contributions that were just awful, so watch it if you can bear it. But just as a final bit of punishment, I will leave you in the not so capable hands of Labour councillor Steve Collings, and you can hear what he has to say about all of this. I would like to thank you for listening and encourage you to share this far and wide if you can. And I've been a little bit quiet recently for obvious reasons, that I've got stuff going on. But I felt like I couldn't not be at this meeting because I've really just been pushing so hard over the last 3 years just to try and get these issues taken seriously. I'm really, really appreciative of the help offered by any other councillor from any political persuasion. I do not care. I do not care. There's plenty of good work that we can do, I think, cross-party still to try and pull this situation back across our various councils and other public services. So I'm happy to connect with anyone else who's involved in similar work, and very happy to hear from anyone who has any expertise to lend to help in resolving this bloody awful issue.
Councillor Collins, and then I'll bring you back in.
So, yeah, we've had a lot about opinion and who we are and our morals, but Article 10, European Convention for the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms, protect the freedom of expression. It states that everyone has the right to hold opinions and to receive the impart information and ideas without interference from public authority and regardless of frontiers. We have seen everyone raising the colours recently in the area, and everyone's entitled to do that. I have no problem with any of that either. People have got the thing right by law to do and what they want within the law. So our policies are based on the law. So if we enforce the laws based on what we have to use, I can't see the problem. I personally wasn't offended by any of the content in that. A lot of that was personal opinion, and I wasn't offended in the slightest. I might have a much lower moral compass than everybody else, I don't know. Like when we have events that we get asked for to support on the mechanical side of it, if someone's asking me for something that supports religious stuff, I won't support it because I'm not religious and I don't believe it should be shared across the borough. So do I stand outside with my anti-cross stuff and say, no, don't do it? No, but we can only go within the law. So I'm happy with what we've got here. I don't mind if we don't take it further, because our officers have followed the law. They've just told us the examples that they come across at the Pride events, and it is within the law. They acted upon the stuff that they feel was disingenuous in regard to the wording on fans, for example, and they have gone forward to try and change that for the next episode that they get. And I completely understand it. And some people can be restricted in what they sell, because that's what the law's there for. We're within the law, we're safeguarding within the law, and you've got to protect freedom of expression. That is the law of the land.